Great, we've made it so far, and I hope so far has been so good. And in this particular section, I will be introducing you to Python statements. It's a quick overview, but we'll dive deep in as we go. But let's get the basic understanding first, and we'll emphasize the difference between Python and other languages so you can relate to it better. Don't worry if you're starting Python as your first language, you could still be able to relate to it because I'm going to take some very generic examples. So what are we talking about when we say statements? What exactly is a statement, and how do I approach learning this particular statement thing? So there are two reasons we take to approach for learning the context of this Python. Number one, let's say you're coming from a different language, like I said, this will really help you accelerate your understanding of Python. And secondly, you'll be able to read other languages more easily in the future and pick up any language that you need to. So we are essentially laying a sort of a foundation for you. So you will be able to pick up any language and understand statements and comprehend anything better. Any object-oriented programming should be a piece of cake after this. So let me give me your 100% focus and let's get started. So let's just do a quick comparo of how Python versus other language. Let's create a simple statement that says if A, when I talk about a statement, it is usually with a condition. And if I want to call I'm a Superman is a statement, but I'm going to phrase it differently. I would say if I had the superpowers, I would be a superhero. Now that's a statement that we are talking about programmatically, and that's a conditional statement because there is a if associated with it, right? So if a spider had bit me, I would have been a Spider-Man. I know it essentially would not have been the case, but I'm just taking as a relative example. In Python, you don't make statements, or in any programming language, you don't make statements that just has a subject, verb, and an object, but they usually have a if and then conditions that what you should be doing. So let's take a quick example. If let's say something simple as if A is greater than B, assign 2 to A and 4 to B. So I'll repeat that. If A is greater than B, assign 2 to A and 4 to B. Simple, isn't it? So let's take a look at these two statements and we'll learn about what we're going to build. So here on the screen we have version 1, which says if A is greater than B. It translates everything what I just said into syntactical code, and it says if A is greater than B, A is equal to 2 and B is equal to 4. Now notice there is a parenthesis right after if, and there is a curly bracket that opens, and then there is A is equal to 2 and a semicolon, and B is equal to 4 and a semicolon, and then there is a closing curly bracket. Now this is in how you might have seen in other languages if you're coming from any other language, and this is definitely not how it's in Python. So how is it in Python? So this second visual that talks about how it's in Python. And the same thing, if A is greater than B, and there's a colon, and A is equal to 2 and B is equal to 4. And that's what we're talking about in Python. So you'll notice that Python is so less cluttered and so much more readable than the first version. Now how does Python manage this? It's very important for us to understand how does this become so simple, so readable. So let's walk through the main differences, right? Python gets rid of that the curved brackets and the curly brackets. Now how does it do that? But it has something else in its place if you have not noticed. Now let's have the visual back again on the screen, and now you can see that the curly brackets are gone, the curvy brackets are gone, and that means there is something else in between. Notice there is a colon and there is a white space, right? The statement is ended with a colon. The moment you put a colon, that Python will understand that you've ended a statement instead of the curly brackets and the flower brackets and the semicolons, and the white space is used, which is also called as indentation, to describe what takes place in the case of the statement. This is really important. And another major difference is a lack of semicolon in Python. So the moment you hit return, Python understands that you end that line. In other languages, semicolon is used so that you can identify, or you tell the compiler that there is an end of line. The line ends when you put that semicolon. But in Python, the moment you hit the return key on your keyboard and you move on to the next line, you're telling compiler the same exact thing. So in Python, the end of a line is the same as end of a statement. And lastly, to end this brief overview of differences, let's take a look at the indentation syntax in Python versus other languages. So here is some pseudocode to indicate the use of white space and indentation in Python. Let's look at this. If x and they do something, if y, then code statement, else there's another code statement, right? And then you note those brackets and note those semicolons and note those indentation between the two ifs, and the else is usually right under the first if, and that's how you tell the compiler that your loop of statements ends there, right? So in Python it is something similar. You still have the if right below the else, but only difference is it's got no brackets. It's simple, straightforward. If x colon, if y colon, then you have a code statement, else another code statement. So it's heavily driven by code indentation and white space. That makes Python readability, and readability has always been a core part of the design of Python language. You take Python to any framework like Django or Flask or anything, you will see this indentation being carried out all through. So it's also very important. It's very simplistic, but sometimes we may miss this out and run into problems. But don't worry, I got this figured out. I will make mistakes in advance so you don't make them, or when you do, you know how to go fix it. So this is also a part of being a developer, being a programmer, is to as much as time you spend in coding, double that you would be spending in understanding how to debug or how to fix something that's broken. And that's a part of the job. Now let's start diving deeper by coding some of these statements in Python, and it's time to code. But just before we do that, there's one last thing I'd like to say, that about if, elif, and else. These are the three statements that we will be heavily using in Python. And there is something that I want to talk about it before we get there, so that it is ingrained in you, and this is something you will not forget. And I want you to go back to this example every time you run into a situation where you're confused, so you can pull yourself out of it. So normally when you have to remember something, you can refer to patterns or colors or objects, and that way or examples, and that way our brain remembers something, and then you build on it, give it more experiences, so your dependency on those examples usually fade away. So there is this exercise, something I want to put you, so that just hear me out, and this I believe will help you remember what we are talking about, especially the statements part. We know that if statements in Python allows us to tell the computer to perform some actions based on certain set of results or conditions. Now verbally, let's imagine we're not coding. We have a computer that listens to what we say and does everything. You don't have to write a line of code. So let's say I'm talking to a computer. I'm talking to this computer, and I'm going to imagine that. So and I'm telling the computer to do something. So let's say, hey computer, if this case happens, you perform this action, right? And that's one of the statement. Now I can expand this idea further with elif and else statements, right? Hear me out. Hey computer, if this case happens, perform some action, else if another case happens, perform another action. If nothing happens, then perform this action. So it's something like that, right? Let's go ahead and look at the syntax on the screen here for the format of statements. So we just exactly did that one right now. So there is if case 1 is to perform action 1, and if case 2, perform action 2, else perform action 3. That is how your computer will perceive what you just said. It divides it into cases and actions, and then else, when it finds else, it understands that that's the last part of the action, that when no options are available, that's the worst case scenario that I have to perform this, and that's what it would, right? Let's see a quick example of this, and let's make sure you code with me on this, and we'll go together. I'm switching over to my computer now, and let's start some code. Great, I have my Jupyter Notebook open, and let's continue. I hope you're enjoying working on Jupyter Notebook. My first example, let's just translate what I just said. I'm going to say if case 1 is true, all right, and then I would say print it was true, all right. So let's see what this should ideally print, because I've set it to be true, and it will continuously put true. Now let's add in some logic, okay. So I'm going to say I will expand this. Okay, so let's make it more interesting. So I'll say x is set to false. All right. So I'm then going to say if x, see the way I'm coding. So the moment I hit return, it puts my there's a tab here. That's the indentation that Jupyter does. Whatever IDE you might be using, if you have a Python package installed, it will be very easy for you to do this. Otherwise, you just hit a double tab, and that will bring you here. Okay, and then I would say print x was true, right? And let's say else print, very simple example, I will be printed in any case where x is not true. So what do you think this should print? Because x is set to false, so x is not true, right? If x is something, so it will print something. So you can take a guess, and I'm going to run this command, and you guessed it right. It's because we've set it to false, it will use the worst case, the last option. It will print when it's not true. So let's get a fuller picture of how far we can go, and I only have 2 conditions. What if I had 3 conditions? And let's see how far this can take us. We write this out in a nested structure, and do take a note of how if, elif, and else line up in the code. Now this can help you see what if is related to what elif or else statements. Now let's introduce ourselves to a comparison syntax of Python. Okay, so I'm going to say that I'm writing a program, and that will ask me where am I, or ask me the location, and it just gives me a welcome. So if I say I'm at a bank, it will tell me welcome to bank. If I say I'm at a auto shop or a grocery store, it will tell me welcome to your grocery store. If nothing is there, I don't know, it should ask me where are you. So let's write that program real quick. So I'm going to say location, and I will say location is a string, and let's say first let's set it to something like this. And now if location is equal, and I say equal is double sign to grocery store, right, and then a colon, then I would say print welcome to the grocery store, right, and then else, or in this case let's go on, add more, location is equal to, let's say, a bank, and then print welcome to the bank. And if nothing is there, else we'll say print where are you. Okay, let's have some fun with this and see what this does. So we've set bank, and no brainer what this will print. It will tell you welcome to the bank. Correct, you guessed it right. Now I want to change this to grocery store, and let's see what this will be. It will be welcome to the grocery store. Now I don't put anything, okay, I put something else here, or I leave it blank. Now it should ask me where are you. So note how the nested statements are checked until a true boolean. So what exactly happened here? When I put anything here, Python is validating against every value to be true, and print only when something is true. When I put this as something else here, it will compare something else with grocery store. If the return is false, it will move on to the next condition. It will compare it with the bank, and when it is wrong, it will move on to the next condition. And then finally, when nothing works, well, it doesn't matter whether it is true or false. In this case, it is true, because we are telling that if anything else you don't understand, ask the person where are you. So it pops that question out. So you can put in as many as elif statements as you want before you close off with an else. Let's create 2 more examples with very simple if, elif, and else, so we understand this example really well. So I'm going to say create another variable called human, and I'm going to say give it a name, and then if human is identified as John, right, then it says I miss the indentation, it takes me, I miss the colon, it takes me back to this, and when I put this, the compiler understands I need to be placing the cursor here with an indentation, welcome John. All right, and then I would say else print hello, welcome, what is your name? Let's something like that. All right. Oops. Now let's execute this because this is John. It's printing John, and I'm going to say James. It doesn't know how to handle James. It'll ask me, hello, welcome, what's your name? So that's how simple it is. And I can put in, let's copy the whole thing again, and I can put in a elif. Let's add what if it knew what it is. So elif human is equal to, right, and I will put this as James, right. So now the system can recognize James, and then let's see what this will be. Okay, there is something wrong with this because I have not put a colon, and then I have not set up anything. So notice how eager we become when we have to say, when we have to move on. So just be wary of that habit, and it says welcome James. Great. So now you know how to work on if and else and elif statements, and it's very important to keep a good understanding of how indentation works in Python. This is very important. It does that because it needs to maintain a structure. We'll touch upon this a lot later, but right now we're building blocks of how important it is of colon, white space, I'm referring to the indentation, and how to structure it. And you may have noticed I made a syntax error, and it gave you that error. All right, so let's move on to the next lesson. See you in the next class.